3D panel setting. 3D panel setting. So what about 3D panel setting? Note here please now. In Photoshop CS6, 3D functionality was part of Photoshop Extended, by the way, and all features in Photoshop Extended are part of Photoshop, and Photoshop doesn't have a separate Extended offering, by the way. And what about 3D panel overview? 3D panel overview. By the way, when you select a 3D layer, the 3D panel shows the components of the associated 3D file, and the top section, by the way, of the panel lists the meshes and materials and layers in the file, and the bottom section of the panel shows setting and options for the 3D components selected in the top section, by the way, like the next screenshot. This image is excellent for you now. 3D panel displaying scan options, and ASC meaning display scan, and BSC meaning ASC meaning display scan, and meshes or materials or layers options, and BSC meaning render presets menu, and CSC meaning customize render setting, and DSC meaning select gesture to paint on, and DSC meaning cross section setting, and FSC meaning toggle overlays, and GSC meaning add new light, and HSC meaning delete light. And the buttons at the top of the 3D panel filter the components, by the way, that appear in the top section. You have to click the scan button to show all components, by the way, then click materials to see just materials, and so on. So what about display the 3D panel? How to display the 3D panel? You should choose Windows firstly, then select 3D, and after that double click the 3D layer icon in the layers panel, and after that you should choose window, then choose workspace, then select advanced 3D. And how to filter the 3D options displayed? Filter the 3D options displayed. Should click the scan and mesh or materials or layers button at the top of the 3D panel. And how to show or hide? How to show or hide a 3D mesh or light? You should click the eye icon, by the way, next to the mesh or light entry in the top section of the 3D panel. And note here, and be careful please here now. By the way, you can't turn material display on the on or off from the 3D panel to show or hide materials or change the visibility setting for their associated textures in the layers panel. And how to access setting for the 3D scan. How to access setting for the 3D scan? We have two steps only. The step number 1, you should click the scan button firstly. Step number 2, if not already selected, you should click the scan entry at the top of the components list. And how to access the setting for a mesh and material or light? You should click the scan button firstly to show all scan components first, and then select a mesh or material or light in the top section. After that, you should click the meshes and materials or lights button to temporarily display just those components, and then select a single mesh or material or light. How to expand or collapse materials for a mesh? How to expand or collapse materials for mesh? We have two steps only. Step number 1, you should click the scan button firstly. Step number 2, click the triangle to the left of a mesh icon. How to view the ground plane? How to view the ground plane? The ground plane, by the way, is a grid that reflects the position of the ground relative to the 3D model. And to view the ground plane, you should click the toggle icon at the bottom of the 3D panel and select 3D ground plane. Note here please now. By the way, the toggle icon is enabled only if OpenGL is available on your system. And how to show or hide? How to show or hide light guides? How to show or hide guide lights? I'm so sorry. How to show or hide light guides? At the bottom of the 3D panel, you should click the toggle icon firstly, then select 3D light. And what about outline the selected material or mesh in the document window? Outline the selected material or mesh in the document window. By the way, at the bottom of the 3D panel, you should click the toggle icon firstly, then select the 3D selection. And by the way, when you select materials or meshes in the panel, a colored outline, by the way, appears in the document window and helping you identify the current item. And by the way, to change the color of 3D overlays like materials and mesh outlines, you should customize options in the 3D section of the preferences dialog box, by the way, like the next image and the next screenshot. This image is now explained for you. We have A and B image. explain for you outlining selected items in the document window, and ASC meaning materials are surrounded by a color line in the left side, and in the right side, the image in the right side B meshes by a bounding box. So what about 3D scan setting? What about 3D scan setting? By the way, you can use the 3D scan setting to change render modes and select a texture to print on or create cross sections. And to access scan setting, you should click the skin button firstly in the 3D panel, and then select the skin entry in the top section of the panel. And we have options here now. The first option, render setting. Render setting is meaning that it specifies the render presets for the model. To customize options and then click edit. For more information, you should to see it changes 3D render setting, by the way. And the second option, quality. Quality is meaning that it chooses a setting which provides the best display quality while maintaining good performance. And the third option, interactive painting. Interactive painting is meaning that renders with OpenGL using the GPU on the video card and producing high quality results but lacking detailed reflections and shadows. For most systems, this option, by the way, is best for editing. And what about ray traced? Ray traced draft. Ray traced draft is meaning that renders using the CPU on the computer motherboard and with draft quality, reflections and shadows. If your system has a powerful video card, the interactive, by the way, option may produce faster results. And what about ray traced final? Ray traced final is meaning that best reserved, by the way, for final output. This option, by the way, for renders, reflections and shadows. For more information, you should to see render a 3D file for final output. And note here and be careful please in this point. Tiles are temporarily drawn across the image during ray traced rendering, by the way, and to interrupt. I'm so sorry. To interrupt the rendering process, you should click the mouse or space bar to change the number of tiling passes and trading processing speed for quality, and change the high quality threshold in the 3D preferences. Like the next image now. This image now explain for you, by the way, tiles are temporarily drawn across the image during ray traced rendering. And what about paint on? Paint on is meaning that, by the way, when painting directly on the 3D model, you can't use menu to choose which texture, by the way, map to paint on, and you to see 3D painting. And by the way, you can also choose the target texture from the 3D and the 3D paint mode menu. And what about global ambient color? Global ambient color is meaning that this is the color for global ambient light visible on reflective surfaces. This color, by the way, interacts with the ambient color for specific materials. And what about cross section? Cross section is meaning that you should select to create a planar cross section that can intersect the model at an angle you choose, and allows you, by the way, to slice through a model and view interior content. And what about view cross sections? View cross sections is meaning that, by the way, you can view a cross section of a 3D model by intersecting it with an invisible plane that slices through the model at any angle and displays content only on one side of the plane. And we have steps here now. The first step, you should select cross section in the bottom section of the scans tab. And step number 2, you should choose options for alignment and the position and orientation. And we have options here now. The first option, plane. Plane is meaning that select to display the intersecting plane that creates the cross section, and you can also choose plane color and opacity. And then the next option, intersection. Intersection is meaning that you should select to highlight the areas of the model that the cross section plane intersects, and you should click. After that, click the color swatch to select the highlight color. And after that, the next option, flip cross section. Flip cross section is meaning that it changes the displayed areas. Changes the displayed area of the model to the opposite side of the intersecting plane. And after that, the next option, offset and tilt. Offset and tilt. It's meaning that use offset to shift the plane along its axis without changing its tilt. And at a default offset of 0. The plane, by the way, intersects the 3D model at its midpoint. And at maximum positive or negative offsets, the plane moves, by the way, beyond any intersection with the model, and you can use tilt setting to rotate the plane up to 360 in either of its possible tilt directions. And for a particular axis, the tilt setting, by the way, rotates the plane along the other two axes. For example, a plane aligned to the y-axis can be rotated, by the way, around the x-axis tilt 1 or the z-axis tilt 2. What about alignment? Alignment is meaning that you should select an axis x or y or z for the intersecting plane, and the plane is perpendicular to the selected axis, by the way. And how to apply different render modes to each cross section. By the way, you can vary the render setting for each side of a cross section to combine different views of the same 3D model, such as wireframe with solid. We have 4 steps here now. The first step, you should select cross section firstly and choose options in the bottom section of the scans tab. After that, your current render settings are applied, by the way, to the visible cross section. Step number 2, you should click render setting or choose 3D, then choose render setting. Step number 3, at the top of the dialog box, you should click the currently unselected cross section button. By default, all render, by the way, settings are turned off for the alternate cross section and making it appear invisible. And step number 4, choose render options for the alternate cross section, by the way, and then click OK. So what about 3D mesh setting? By the way, each mesh in the 3D model appears on a separate line in the top section of the 3D panel. And then select a mesh to access mesh setting and information in the lower section of the 3D panel. And by the way, information includes the number of materials and textures applied to the mesh, as well as the number of vertices and faces it contains. You can also set the following mesh display options, by the way, and not here in this point, and be careful. To see shadows, set the lights and select ray traced for render quality. And we have options here now. The first option, catch shadows. I'm so sorry. The first option, catch shadows. What about catch shadows? It's meaning that controls whether the selected mesh displays shadows on a surface from other meshes. And not here, and be careful please here now. To catch shadows from the ground plane on meshes, you should select 3D, then select ground plane shadow catcher. To align these shadows with objects, select 3D, then select snap object to ground plane. And the next option, cast shadows. What's the meaning of cast shadows? It's meaning that controls whether the selected mesh casts shadows on other mesh surfaces. And the next option, invisible is meaning that hides the mesh but displays any shadows on its surface. And the next option, shadow opacity is meaning that opacity controls the softness of shadows cast by the selected mesh, and the setting is helpful when blending 3D objects with layers blue, by the way. And what about show or hide mesh? By the way, you should click the icon next to a mesh name in the top section of the 3D panel. And how to manipulate individual meshes. By the way, you can use the mesh position tools to move or rotate or scale a selected mesh without moving the model as a whole. And the position tools operate in the same way, by the way, as the main 3D position tools in the tools panel. For information on each tool, you should see move and rotate or scale a model with 3D object tools. We have steps. Step number 1. Select a mesh in the top section of the 3D panel. Then select mesh is highlighted. By the way, the selected mesh is highlighted with a red box in the lower section of the panel. Step number 2. Select and use. Select and use a mesh position tool in the lower section of the panel to move the mesh. And by the way, to manipulate the entire module while an individual mesh is selected, you can use the 3 tools in the tools panel. And what about 3D materials setting? What about 3D materials setting? By the way, the top part of the 3D panel lists the materials used in the 3D file. And when multiple materials may be used, by the way, to create the overall appearance of the model. And if a model contains several meshes, there may be a specific material, by the way, associated with each mesh. Or a model can be pulled from one mesh but use different materials in different areas, by the way. Like the next image and next screenshot. This image, by the way, explains for you a selected material and its associated texture maps. And A, meaning displays materials options. And B, selected material. And C, material speaker. And D, material drop and select tools. And E, texture map menu icon. And F, texture map types. And by the way, for a selected material in the top section of the 3D panel, the lower section, by the way, shows the particular texture maps used by that material. And some texture types, such as diffuse and bump, commonly rely on 2D files to supply a particular color or pattern that creates the texture, by the way, for other texture types. And you may not need a separate 2D file. For example, you can directly adjust gloss, shine, or opacity, or reflection by entering values. And the texture maps, by the way, used by a material appear as textures in the layers panel and grouped by the texture map category. And by the way, to see a sample of a texture map image, hover the mouse over the texture name. For example, reflection or illumination. We have options here. The first option, diffuse. What about diffuse? Diffuse is meaning that the color of the material. The diffuse map can be a solid color or any 2D content, by the way. And the diffuse color swatch values sets the diffuse color if you choose to remove the diffuse texture map. And you can also create a diffuse map by painting directly on the model. And the second option, opacity, is meaning that increases or decreases opacity of the material from 0 to 100%. And you can also use a texture map or the scrappy slider to control opacity. And the grayscale values, by the way, of the texture map control opacity of the material. And white values create complete opacity, and black values create complete transparency. So what about bump? What about bump? Bump is meaning that creates bumps in the material surface without altering the underlying mesh. And the bump map is a grayscale image, by the way, in which lighter values create raised surface areas and darker values create flatter surface areas. And also you can create or load a bump map file, by the way, or begin painting on the model to automatically create a bump map file. And by the way, the bump field increases or reduces bumpiness. It's only active if a bump map exists and enter a number in the field or use the scrappy slider to increase or decrease bump strength. And by the way, bumpiness is most pronounced when a surface is viewed head-on rather than at an angle. We have options here. The first option, normal. Normal is meaning that, like a bump map texture, a normal map, by the way, increases surface detail, and unlike a bump texture map, which is based on a single channel grayscale image, and a normal map is based on a multi-channel RGB image. And the values of each color, by the way, channel represent the X and Y and Z components of a normal on the model surface. And a normal map can be used to smooth the surfaces of low polygon meshes. Note here, please note here. Photoshop uses, by the way, world space normal maps, which offer the fastest processing. And what about environment? Environment is meaning that stores the image of the environment surrounding the 3D model. And environment maps, by the way, are applied as spherical panoramas. And the contents of the environment map can be seen in the reflective areas of the model. And by the way, to prevent an environment map from reflecting on a given material, you should change reflectivity reflectivity to 0%. Add a reflectivity map that masks the material area, or remove the environment map for that material. We have options again. The first option, reflection. What about reflection? Reflection is meaning that increases the reflection of other objects in the 3D scan and the environment map on the material surface. The second option, illumination. Illumination is meaning that defines a color that doesn't rely on lighting to display, creates the effect that the 3D object is lit from within. The third option, gloss. Gloss. What about gloss? Gloss is meaning that defines the amount of light from a source that reflects off the surface and back to the viewer. And you can also adjust glossiness by entering a value in the field or using the scrappy slider. And if you create a separate glossiness map, the intensity by the way of colors in the map controls glossiness in the material. And after that, black areas create full glossiness by the way, and white areas remove all glossiness. And middle values reduce the size of a highlight. So what about a shine? A shine is meaning that defines the dispersion of the reflected light generated by the gloss setting. And low shyness, high dispersion, produces more apparent by the way light, and with less focus, high shyness, low dispersion. Dispersion produces less apparent light and brighter, crisper highlights. Like the next screenshot. This screenshot now explain for you adjusting gloss in the left number and a shine in the right number. Yes. And note here please and be careful. By the way, if a 3D object has more than the 9 texture types, Photoshop supports additional texture by the way appear in the layers panel and the 3D paint mode list. To display the letter and choose 3D, then choose 3D paint mode, or use the paint or on menu in the scan section of the 3D panel. The next option, specular. What about specular? Specular is meaning that the card displayed for specular properties, for example, highlight, glossness, and shyness. And the second option, ambient. What about ambient? Ambient is meaning that sets the color for ambient light visible on reflective surfaces. And this color by the way interacts with the global ambient color for the entire scan. And the second option, refraction. Refraction is meaning that sets the refractive index when skin quality is set to ray traced and the reflections options is selected in the 3D and render setting dialog box. And refraction is the change in light direction that occurs at the intersection of two media by the way, such as air and water. And with different refractive indexes, the default value by the way for new materials is 1.0 and the approximate value for air. What about sample? Sample and apply materials directly on objects. Sample and apply materials directly on objects. Sample. By the way, the 3D material drop tool works much like the traditional bent bucket tool, and letting you sample and apply materials directly on 3D objects. We have 3 steps here now. The first step, in the 3D panel, select the 3D material drop tool, and the second step, move the pointer over the 3D object in the document window, and when the material you want to sample is outlined, you should to press Alt click if you use Windows, or Option click if you use macOS. And the third step, move the pointer to outline the material you want to change, and then click. And by the way, for a visual example of an outlined material, you should to see outline the selected material or mesh in the document window. How to select materials directly on objects? How to select materials directly on objects? We have 2 steps only. The first step, in 3D panel, hold down the 3D material drop tool, and then select the 3D select material tool. Step number 2, you should to move the pointer over the 3D object in the document window. After that, when the material you want to select is outlined, click. how to apply and save or load material presets, how to apply and save or load materials presets. By the way, material presets let you quickly apply groups of texture setting, and the default presets provide various materials like steel and fabric and wood, like the next screenshot. This image, by the way, explained for you. Click the material preview to display the preset pop-up panel. And we have steps. Step number 1. In the 3D panel, click the material preview firstly, and after that, step number 2. In the preset pop-up panel menu, do any of the following. To apply a preset, double click a thumbnail preview firstly. After that, create a preset from the current texture setting, click the pop-up menu icon and then choose a new material. After that, to rename or delete selected presets, you should click the pop-up menu icon and then choose rename or delete material. And after that, to save the current group of presets, you should click the pop-up menu icon and choose save materials. After that, to change the displayed group, you should click the pop-up menu icon, then choose reset materials to restore a saved group, then load materials to append a saved group or replace materials. How to create a texture map. How to create a texture map? We have 3 steps only. The first step here now. You should click the folder icon firstly, next to the texture map type. After that, step number 2, choose new texture. And number 3, enter the name, dimensions, and resolution, and color mode for the new map, and then click OK. And by the way, to match the aspect ratio of an existing texture map, you should view its dimensions by hovering the mouse pointer over the map name in the layers panel. And by the way, the name of the new texture map is displayed next to the texture map type in the materials panel, and is also added, by the way, to the texture list under the 3D layer in the layers panel. And the default name is the texture map type appended to the material name, by the way. And how to load a texture map? How to load a texture map? By the way, you can load an existing 2D texture file for any of the 9 available texture map types. We have 2 steps only to load texture map. The first step, you should click the folder icon firstly, then next to the texture type. And step number 2, you should choose load texture, then select and open the 2D texture file. And how to create a bump texture map? How to create a bump texture map? By the way, a bump texture map filed with a natural grayscale value provides more range when painting on the map. We have steps. Number 1, in the tools panel, you should click the set background color swatch. And step number 2, in the color picker, set brightness to 50% and set R and G and B values to equal values, and then click OK. Step number 3, in the 3D panel, click the folder icon, then next to bump. Step number 4, choose new texture. Step number 5, choose the following setting in the new dialog box. By the way, for color mode, choose grayscale, and for background contents, choose background color, and optional again. Set width and height to match the dimensions of the diffuse texture map for the material, then click OK after that to execute. And by the way, the bump texture map is created and added to the texture map files listed in the materials panel, by the way, and it also appears as a texture in the layers panel. How to open? How to open a texture map for editing? How to open a texture map for editing? You should click the image icon firstly, then choose open texture. And by the way, the texture map opens as a smart object in its own document window. And after editing the texture, by the way, make the 3D model document window active to see updates to the model. How to delete texture map? How to delete texture map? We have 2 steps only. The first step, you should click the image icon firstly, next to the texture type. After that, choose remove texture. And by the way, if the deleted texture is an external file, you can reload, by the way, it using the load texture command from the texture map menu. And for textures that are internally referenced by the 3D file, you should choose undo or step backwards to restore a delete texture. How to edit texture properties. How to edit texture properties. By the way, a texture map is applied to a particular surface area of the model, and depending on its UV mapping parameters, you can adjust by the way UV scale and offset if necessary to improve how the texture maps to the model. And we have 3 steps here now. The first one, click the image icon, then next to the texture map. And the second one, choose edit properties, and after that, number 3, choose a target layer and set UV scale and offset values. And by the way, you can enter values directly or use the scrappy slider. And we have options here in this point. Step number 3, we have 3 options here. Under step number 3 options. The first option, target. Target is meaning that determines whether setting apply to a specific layer or the composite image. The second option, U and V scale. U and V scale resize mapped textures to create a repeating pattern and decrease the value. And the third option, U and V offset, is meaning that reposition mapped textures. So what about 3D lights setting? 3D light setting is meaning that 3D light setting 3D lights illuminate models from different angles and adding realistic depths and shadows. And how to add or delete individual lights. How to add or delete individual lights. By the way, in the 3D panel, or do either of the following. To add a light, you should to click the create a new light button firstly, and after that choose the light type. And next, point lights shine in all directions like light bulbs. And after that, spotlights shine in a cone shape, and which you can adjust. And after that, infinite lights shine from one directional plane and like sunlight. After that, image based lights map an illuminated image around the 3D scan. And to delete, after that, to delete a light, what should you do? Select it from the list at the top of the lights section, and then click the delete button at the bottom of the panel. How to adjust light properties? How to adjust light properties? We have steps, 2 steps only. Step number 1, in the light section of the 3D panel, you should select a light from the list. Step number 2, in the lower half of the panel, set the following options. We have many options here now under step number 2. Like preset. First option, preset. Preset is meaning that applies a saved group of lights and setting. And second option, light type. Light type is meaning that it chooses from the options described in the add or delete individual lights. The third option, intensity. Intensity is meaning that adjusts brightness. And after that, color. Color is meaning defines the color of the light. And then click the box to access the color picker. After that, image. Image is meaning that for image based lights it specifies a bitmap or 3D file. For dramatic effects, try 32 byte HDR images. After that, create shadows. What about create shadows? It's meaning that cast shadows from foreground surfaces onto background surfaces, and from a single mesh onto itself, or from one mesh onto another. Disabling this option, by the way, improves performance slightly. And after that, softness. What's the meaning of softness? It's meaning that blurs the edge of shadows and producing a gradual fall off. And step number 3, for point or spotlights, set these additional options. We have 3 options under step number 3. 3 options again under step number 3 here now. The first option, hotspot. Hotspot is meaning spotlights only. Sets the width of the bright center of the light. And fall off. Fall off is meaning spotlights only. Sets the outer width of the light. And the next option, use attenuation. Use attenuation. It's meaning that inner and outer options determine the cone of attenuation and how fast light intensity decreases as distance from objects increases, and when an object is closer than inner limit, light is full strength, by the way, and when an object is further than outer limit, light is a 0 strength at intermediate distances, and light attenuates linearly from full strength to 0. and hover the pointer over the hotspot, followed by the way and inner and outer attenuation options. Red outlines in the icon to the right indicate the affected light element. So what about position lights? Position lights is meaning that in the light section of the 3D panel, you should select any of the following. We have options here. The first option, rotate tool. What about rotate tool? Rotate tool like spot and like infinite and image based lights rotates light while maintaining its position in 3D space, by the way. And by the way, to quickly aim a light at a specific area, you should to press Alt click if you use Windows, or press Option click if you use macOS in the document window. And second option, pan tool. Pan tool is spinning spot and point lights only, and moves the light to a different position in the same 3D plane. And the next option, slide tool. A slide tool is spinning spot and point lights only, and moves the light to the different 3D plane. And the next option, point light at origin. Point light at origin is spinning spotlight only, and directs light at the center of the model. The next option, move to current view. Move to current view is spinning places light in the same position as the camera. And to precisely position image based lights, you can use the 3D axis and which wraps the image around a sphere. So what about add light guides? Add light guides. By the way, add light guides is meaning light guides provide spatial reference point for your adjustments. These guides, by the way, reflect the type and angle and attenuation and of each light, and point lights appear as a pole, and the spotlights as a cone, and infinite lights as a line. And by the way, at the bottom of the 3D panel, you should click the toggle icon and select the 3D light. And by the way, you can change the guide color in the 3D section of the preferences dialog box. And this image now and the screenshot explain for you light guides. A is meaning point light, and B spotlight, and C infinite light. How to save or replace or add groups of lights. How to save or replace or add groups of lights. By the way, to store groups of lights for later use and save them as a preset. To include the preset in other projects and either add or replace the existing lights. From the 3D panel menu, you should select any of the following. We have options again. The first option here now, save lights preset. Save lights preset. It's meaning saves the current group of lights as a preset that you can reload with the following commands, by the way. The second option, add lights. Add lights is meaning that to the existing lights, you should to add a lights preset that you select. After that, replace lights is meaning that replaces the existing lights with a preset that you select.